Good morning. Today is 20 January, the year 2008. I'm Dr. Dave Thompson, a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of our country's military conflicts, especially World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in those conflicts. Today, I'm here at the museum along with special guests, Linda Christensen and Ann Devorkin. And today, we have the honor and the privilege of interviewing Lieutenant Ray Devorkin. Lieutenant Devorkin was a U.S. Air Force navigator ferrying planes from the United States over to Europe during World War II. So we're going to talk to him about that and a lot of other things. Ray, nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, first of all, would you spell your last name for us, please?
Devorkin.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, September 26, 1921.
Okay, and that makes you how many years young?
86.
86. It looks like you're doing great. And what did your father do, and what was his name?
My father owned a retail junk shop. Prior to that, he was a participant in the packing department of a tailoring company.
Okay.
And his name was Sidney.
Sidney. And how did he end up in Chicago? Where did your ancestors all come from?
They came from Russia, approximately early 1900s.
Okay. Do you know what part of Russia that they came from?
He came from Kiev, Russia.
Oh, okay. And what prompted him to come to the United States?
Persecution.
And was he Jewish?
Yes,
Is
he
that
was
why?
Jewish, right.
Okay. So they had the, we call pogroms?
The pogroms.
Pogroms, yeah. And did he talk about that, Annie? Do you know much about what he had to go through over there?
Not too much.
Yeah.
We never discussed that.
And how old was he when he came here?
I think he was around 12.
And what did his father do over in Russia? Or what did the family do?
I can't say. I can't recall. But over here, he owned a retail junk shop.
Did he come with his whole family?
His family.
I see. Yeah. Okay. And your mother, what was her name and her maiden name?
My mother's name was Mildred Kobrinsky.
And did they meet in Chicago?
Met in Chicago. We met in high school.
And what about her ancestors? Where did they all come from?
They all came from Poland, a little town called Kobrin, Kobrim, which was 120 miles east of Warsaw.
Okay. And did they come for the same reason?
They came for the same reason. My grandfather, my mother's father, he would periodically come here and work for 6 months, save up enough money, go back to the family, until such time he had 4 sons and my mother. And the 4 sons, as they got older, they faced conscription into the Polish army. And with the situation in Poland with the pogroms, he migrated the entire family to Palestine. And they lived in Palestine for about 12 years. And then they migrated to the United States and they settled in Chicago.
Can you give me a little rundown on the history of Palestine? I know that we know what's going on over there now, and I know at the end of World War II they brought a lot of the Jewish people back to Palestine, but how did it end up that there weren't very many Jewish people there, or
There
what was
were
the deal?
a Jewish population. They lived just outside Jerusalem. And when they decided, the sons were very well educated in Jewish history, and his hope was that they would be all rabbis. Well, it didn't turn out that way. They had various skills. One, the oldest, was very knowledgeable in music, and one was a cabinet maker when he came to the United States. The other one served in World War I, was gassed.
Oh.
And as a young child, we used to lay on the floor and he would tell us war stories of World War I and the Germans. But of the four sons, the youngest, my mother was the second from the youngest. The youngest, as they got to Marseille, France, and went through a health inspection, they all passed except the youngest. He had trichinosis. So he was rejected and was shipped back. He was about 12. And he was shipped back to Palestine. He lived with relatives. And he lived there until he was about 18. And in 1923, you had an Arab uprising. And an Arab family that was very friendly with them, they owned a laundry. And in the uprising, they hid him in the laundry, and he survived. And he came here, and they were all bachelors, every one of them. Except one, the one that was gassed in World War I, he married. And he had two children, a daughter and a son. They're all deceased right now. And
But I was wondering, I'm sorry, I was wondering, back in those days, prior to the 20s, or prior to World War I, let's say, for instance, was the relationship between the Arabs and the Jews better than it is now?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I mean, I had read things where they got along pretty well.
Yes,
for a
right.
long
There
time.
was not a problem. There wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
Until, I don't know what happened, I didn't read up on it. In 1923, they had a huge uprising, and there was a lot of killing and so forth, and that's when they...
And did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had a sister.
And what's her name?
Her name was Harriet. She's deceased. She was 8 years younger than mine.
I see. And do you remember where did the home you lived in Chicago, where that was?
Oh, yes. During the Depression time, my mother's family, my grandfather was a very religious man, and he retired having 4 sons bringing the money in. They owned a 2-flat building, and when I was born...
What kind of building?
A 2-flat, 2-story.
Oh, 2-story.
2-story. They rented out, they had a basement, and they rented out the second floor. We lived on the first floor, and we lived with them for 3.5 years during the Depression time, after which we moved out. And it was... Depression time was tough times in the days.
Yeah. Was your dad able to work all during the Depression?
Yes, he worked, and he used to rent a horse and wagon and acquire junk in the various neighborhoods and then sell it and so forth. So
do you remember the address that you lived at most of your time when you were growing up?
Well, and my grandparents, they lived at 1400 something South Central Park Avenue.
In what part of Chicago?
That was the west side,
Uh-huh.
predominantly inhabited by the Jewish population. It was called the 24th Ward, which is history of before Daley and before it was Jacob Harvey. It was the powerhouse. That was the most powerful ward in the United States, Democratic ward. And then we moved out, and after that, my parents, my dad, in the wintertime, used to peddle with a horse and wagon fruit and vegetables, and in the summertime, junk. And they'd go through the alleys in the various neighborhoods, and the cry was Rex the Lion. That means rags and iron.
Oh.
But the colloquialism was Rex the Lion. And in those days, you had many horse stables that you go to the stable and you would rent a horse and wagon for $2.
Did you ever go with him?
No.
Okay.
And then if you didn't have enough stock money to begin with, then the owner of the stable would give you some stock money to start with, and through the course of the event, he would bring the horse and wagon back, sometimes on a weekly basis. But after peddling fruit and so forth, he decided to open up a grocery store, fruits and vegetables. So we moved out of my grandfather's apartment to back of the store. And that lasted, I don't know, maybe 2 years or so, and it failed. And after that, he opened up a retail junk shop.
And how would he acquire the junk? Kind of like he did before, or?
No. That would he in the same old West Side. The original West Side, it was called Maxwell Street. That's where most of the immigrants came. Famous people, Benny Goodman lived there, and other renowned people that got started, and they went to high school, Smith High School in that particular area, and that's where my mother met my dad. My mother was 19 years old when she got married. My dad, I think, was 21.
Yeah.
But the way that developed, there were various retail junk shops that people would bring junk for sale to the junk shop. But in that particular case, they would have, they called them pickers. What they would do, they were people that were either alcoholics or down in life, a variety of ethnic groups. And my dad would provide these carts. And how the carts were made, I used to go when I was a kid, we'd go out to all the farmlands and buy up old wagon wheels. And they would have a carpenter build a box for those wagon wheels with the axle. And then these pickers would come, and they would take one of these wagons out, and they'd go out collecting from the various retail stores either old rags or perhaps non-ferrous metals, and basically waste paper and old corrugated boxes. They would break it down, and they would have a strap, 2 handles, and they would pull it across the strap. So they would act and simulate like a horse pulling these, and they were quite heavy, and they would bring it in, and my dad would weigh all the material, weigh the entire thing on a scale, and pay him appropriately for what the various items on that. And I used to help him as a kid. I used to come down in summertime.
And then who would buy that stuff?
Then it was, the waste paper was baled, big bales, and the magazines were baled separately, and the rags were baled separately, and then it would be shipped out by truck to wholesalers, and that went to paper mills for recycling.
That's what I was going to ask you, if they were recycling in those days.
Oh, yes. Yeah. It wasn't called recycling. That was a new fashionable word.
Even the metal stuff?
Metal, oh, yes. They went to, the various metals were sorted. My dad used to sort them in 55-gallon drums, and the copper would go in one, and the brass, yellow brass would go in another, and the red brass would go in another, and the lead would go in another, and each one of those items would go to a non-ferrous metal dealer for sale. The metal dealer would then accumulate the various items, and he would ship it to refinery.
So this would be metal that did not have iron in it?
That's right, non-ferrous.
And,
right.
And what did they do with the metal that had iron in it?
Well, that would go to the scrap iron yard. Okay. And they would go be sorted out in the large scrap iron yards, and they would be either bundled and shipped to the steel mills for recycling, or various other.
And where was your store? The junk store.
This stuff, well, non-ferrous.
No. I mean, where was the physical location of the store your dad had? What street was it on?
Oh, that was on 14th and Morgan Street on the old West Side. In fact, it was a half a block away from the Maxwell Street Police Station, which was in the film of Hill Street Blues.
Oh, really?
That's where it's found. It's still there now. There's been a total renovation of the entire area because the University of Illinois, the Chicago campus, has expanded and has taken over and gentrified everything and taken over the entire area.
And did you guys live? Did you guys live there, or did you have a home somewhere?
No, we didn't have a home. We always lived in an apartment.
Okay, but close by, or where was?
No, not really close by. First apartment we lived in, after the grocery store, we lived on a place on the west side, the further west side. That was on 14th and Keeler. And there were very few Jewish families on that street. We went to the Bryan School from kindergarten on, which was right behind the building. It was a 3-story building we lived in. The owners of the building were sisters. One lived on the 3rd floor, one lived on the 2nd floor, and we lived on the 1st floor. And we made a lot of friends. There were about 4 buildings on that block, the only buildings that were on a block that were Jewish. So they all congregated together. The grammar school I went to, the Bryan School, was a mixed ethnic groups, and everybody got along pretty well.
That's what I was going to ask you.
But we had gangs in those days too, that were, you get in a rumble and so forth.
Was your family pretty religious?
My mother was.
Did you?
My dad was well versed in the dogma of Judaism, but he was not a real practicing Jew. My mother's side was always.
Where was the synagogue that you went to?
Well, we went to a synagogue that was near my mother's father's place, who was very active. He retired when he was 50 years old. And he was at the synagogue all day long arguing with the rabbi, about dogma, religion, and so forth. So we went to that synagogue, and that synagogue was called the Kreuzer Shul. And as I got to be 8 or 9, I used to sing in a choir there.
What did that mean? Did that term? What did you call it again?
The name of the synagogue was a Hebrew name. It was called the Kreuzer Shul.
Did it have an English connotation? I mean,
it had
translation.
No, it was all Jewish congregation.
No. What did it mean in English?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, but it was active. I would say they had about 500 families, maybe 600 families.
Did you make your bar mitzvah and stuff?
My bar mitzvah was there. Sure.
So that's a lot of studying goes into that, doesn't it?
Well, I did. When I first started out, the rabbi used to come to my house, but then I went to Hebrew school.
Oh.
After Hebrew school, I went to theological seminary.
You did. Oh.
So I was there until I was about 15 in high school. That was it.
And where was that seminary you went to?
That was on the west side, called the Jewish People's Institute, right across of it. It was on Douglas Boulevard in St. Louis.
Was that to prepare you to be a rabbi if you wanted to do that?
Yeah, right.
And had you had thoughts about being a rabbi?
No.
Okay. Did you like sports?
I was a sport. My dad was when he came over here, he was an ice cream vendor as a young kid at the Cubs Park, where the old Cubs Park is where the county hospital was built afterward. And then it went to Wrigley Field, which is a famous.
Did Wrigley own it then, when it was before Wrigley Field?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Yeah.
And the Cubs Park was called Wrigley Field, but he didn't own the land. It was a 99-year lease. So he was telling the stories. He says he'd get fired because he would be watching the ball game and all the ice cream melted. So he'd go outside and look at the ball game through knotholes. His kids.
Knothole game.
After that, he became a dyed-in-the-wool Cub fan.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, we used to go to Wrigley Field all the time.
See Stan Hack and those guys?
Oh, before that.
Even before that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Charlie Root, Guy Bush. I remember going at the doubleheader in those days. They played doubleheaders on Sunday. And it was always a packed house, especially when the New York Giants came to play the Cubs. It was a big rivalry. And the overflow crowd, the bleachers were not like it is today, very fancy with brick and so forth. But it was just a cyclone fence. And what they did, they strung a rope from left field all the way to right field. And they would admit spectators behind that rope in the outfield from left field, center field, right field. And if the ball was hit into that overflow crowd, it was a ground rule double. And I remember to this day, we went to a ball game between the Giants and the Cubs. And Guy Bush was pitching for the Cubs. And Carl Hubble was pitching for the Giants. And it was the second game. I forgot who won that. But the second game, the Cubs had in the ninth inning a man on third base with 2 outs. Joe McCarthy was the manager at that time for the Cubs. And he stole home to win the game. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
But then, as I got older, matured, got into business, went to college, and my college days were very interesting. We were still not middle class. We were just below middle class. And actually, there was a tremendous desire for most of the families that were immigrants that their children should have a better education. They were very educated oriented. And I was a good school. A good student. Went to a technical school, all boys, called Crane Tech.
Yeah, I've heard of that. For high school, the Finnish
High school,
right?
It had 5,000 students, and very, very well oriented.
They have
in the sciences.
pretty good. Yeah, but they also had pretty good. Didn't they have pretty good sports teams there?
Yes, high school with a lot of competitions. I played basketball for Crane. We had 2 divisions. The lights, that was 5'7" and under. I'm not 5'7" anymore, but and 5'8" and over. They were called the heavies. We were called the lights. And I played. I was a pretty good athlete. Not as good as you, but but I was a pretty good athlete. And I wanted to go to University of Chicago, and we didn't have any money. But Crane prepared me in every facet of the sciences and almost everything except in literature. Very poor. So I took the scholarship exam, which ran for about 4 days at the University of Chicago. Passed everything except the literature. Didn't make it. So I had to go to the University of Illinois in Champaign. And my mother saved up enough money. In those days, it was 1938. And while in high school, I used to get out at 1:30. And I'd catch what we call the transit, the elevated. I'd get on the elevator for 3 cents. I'd go out to the suburb of Maywood, where American Can was. And I worked the 3 to 11 shift on the line where the pet milk cans came down. They put the tops and bottoms on. Well, things were very, very stringent in those days. You weren't allowed to go to the bathroom. You had to get fired. But I sat on this line, and I had a little ballpoint, had a ball pen hammer, little hammer, and I had a little anvil. And it was a fiber drum barrel next to me. And this gal was opposite me on this line. And as these cans came down, she would look at the cans, and if the top and the bottom wasn't on perfectly, she'd flip the cans in this barrel. I'd have to take it out, take the top and bottom off, straighten it out with a hammer, put it back on the line. And the noise was so tremendous, you wore earplugs. If you had to go to the bathroom, you had to raise your hand. The foreman would come over and sit in. You better not be in that bathroom too long. When lunchtime came, a whistle blew. Everybody got up. You had half an hour of lunch. We brown bagged it. Back on the line. 3 to 8. I earned 20 cents an hour. It was big money, $8 a week. And the gal, she was more experienced. She got a quarter an hour. And she was driving a car that she bought for $50. So those are the days. So I went to college, went down to University of Illinois Champaign. I was in the engineering school. And there was another fella that I met, and he was a heavy all-city basketball player. So we got friendly, and we roomed together in Urbana in a private home This gal had 2 bedrooms upstairs. She was a widow, and she had 1 bedroom downstairs. And he and I, Frankel his name was, and he and I became very close friends. And he was poorer than I was. So he worked for his meals at a sorority house, and we paid $8 a month for the room. She changed sheets once a week, gave us 1 set of towels, but we had our own. Our laundry, in those days, I sent home. We had a fiber box, a fiber suitcase like. The top fit right down over the bottom. It had 2 straps, and parcel post was cheap. So I put all my laundry in, sent it home. My mother would iron it and so forth. It'd come back nice and neat. So that was hardly anything. Then I had to have food. So there was a gal around the corner in Urbana. Her name was Ma Hopper. She was from Kentucky. And she had a house also, these old southern-like houses. And she had 4 bedrooms upstairs, but she served meals, family meals, to 21 of us in the dining room and on 2 tables. There were 21 of us, served family style. When I got to school, I weighed 125 pounds. After the first year, I weighed 150 because it was all starches. And she served 20 meals a week. The biggest meal was on Sunday at 1 o'clock. That was fried chicken. If you didn't eat fast, you didn't get any seconds. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, 20 meals for $5. On Sunday night, Steak and Shake was on campus in a little store next to the co-ed theater where Champaign and Urbana divided on campus. So we had to go to have dinner on Sunday night. Well, we went to Steak and Shake. We got a hamburger, French fried potatoes, and a chocolate shake for $0.25. So that took 4 quarters a month. Next door was the co-ed theater. We'd save a nickel, go to the theater. My mother gave me $5 a month spending money. So you needed a beer, the bowling alley, I think was 3 lines for a dime or something like that. We made it stretch. And we had a lot of fun.
I wanted to back up a little bit. When you were growing up, what did you kids do for fun?
For what?
For fun. For
fun.
What kind of games did you play? What did
Well,
you
we
do?
used to play kick the can.
What's that?
Well, you had a can. It was a soda can, pop or so forth. And you would kick it, see how far you can go. You had a team on that side, a team on this side. Then we played a game called Relivio.
I've heard that name.
Yeah.
But what
We had a big circle in the ground at the parkway.
uh-huh.
And we chose up teams. And we go hide. The other team would have to find us. Well, we hid in garbage cans, you name it. And then you had to get back in to that circle without getting caught. So that was, then we
By
played
getting caught, you mean seen or actually physically?
getting caught before you got
physically-
in a circle.
I mean physically grabbed?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Then we had a game called Buck, Buck, Buck. How many fingers up? So you throw up sides, maybe 4 on a side. And one team would get down like against a tree. And 1, 2, 3, and so forth. The other one would have to go like on a horse, like in gymnastics, and fly up there. Then the next one behind them. And if you didn't collapse, you would win. That was called Relief. That was called Buck, Buck, Buck. But we played in the streets. On Sunday, the men, they would rope off the street. We played in summertime line ball, softball. So we would designate, it was slow pitching, 16-inch slow pitching, which was a big game in Chicago. Some of the world tournaments were played at Lincoln Park in Chicago. And if you hit it past a certain line, it was a single. That's the second line, so and so. So we played maybe 4 on a side, you know. In the fall, we play football, touch football. Same way on that street. There were big games. They were lined up on both sides, people. And we had a lot of fun. If you wanted a game, everybody lived in an apartment building. You go to a mailbox, ring all the bells, bing, everybody's down, you had a game. Then we had some organized stuff too. Played at the playgrounds and so forth. But we managed to have fun.
Were you a Bear fan?
Oh,
Cheered the
yes.
Bears? Yeah. Did you see Red Grange when he played?
Yes.
And he played at Illinois too. Well, of course not. Well,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
close. I mean, in
And Louis
Champaign.
Boudreaux was a senior when I was a freshman at the University of Illinois.
Oh.
Then he left as a senior.
Yeah.
He was a great basketball player, and he played with a guy at Thornton High School. They were all state. Great basketball player, Tommy Nesbitt. I was a sport nut, and I participated. My dad was one of the top 4 Cup fans in the city of Chicago. We had season tickets, and we had season tickets for the Bears. I used to take them,
Really?
the kids, when they were young,
Yeah.
coldest weather, 1963.
Soldier Field.
63 when they played for the championship.
Oh,
It
yeah,
was
that's
3 above zero when it was snowing, and oh God, played the Giants.
Yeah.
We had tickets for the Chicago Cardinals before Alice
Did
kicked
you?
them out. And I remember the Cardinals in 47, I think it was, they had Trippy, Paul Hanksman.
Elmer
They
Angston.
played for the championship on a frozen field against the Philadelphia Eagles. And there were 7 touchdowns scored, all from scrimmage. Once they broke the line of scrimmage, you couldn't catch them. It was all ice.
Mm-hmm.
And the Cardinals won 28-21. Greasy Neal was the coach.
Paul Chrisman was a
Paul
quarterback.
Chrisman,
Yeah.
Charlie Trippy,
Elmer Angston.
Marshall Goldberg,
Mm.
Elmer Angsman.
Right. Yeah.
Great teams. But
Yeah.
then Alice kicked them out of Chicago.
So that's.
They never
I was
won the
wondering
state.
why they went to St. Louis. I was a St. Louis Cardinal baseball fan, being from Southern Indiana, and so
Oh, sure.
I kind of like the Chicago Cardinals because of the same thing.
I was
Cardinals,
stationed in the service with Jimmy Brown and the pitcher Beasley. We were stationed in Memphis.
Al Beasley, yeah.
And we used to play, Jimmy Brown was the second baseman, Beasley was the pitcher.
Right.
And the squadron used to play the other squadrons through 2 garbage cans, 30-gallon garbage cans iced with beer. And it was kitten ball, that was fast pitching, which was the big thing, Southern Illinois and the farm kids and so forth. They played with gloves, fast pitching underneath. We had a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
That's good. So, and did you have any odd jobs when you were in high school or grade school, the paper route or things like
I
that?
had a paper route when I was in grade school, and we lived in we moved out of 14th and Keeler, and we went to another apartment building. In those days, people would move quite readily because you would get perks, 6 months free, or new decorating and so forth. When I had saved up enough money, and I had a 2-wheel bicycle. There were 2 bicycles that famed, blue and tires. One was called a Ranger and one was called the Elton. And I had a Ranger, it was beautiful. And I stored it in a shed in the basement. And I had 100 paper routes that I would deliver in the whole neighborhood, some apartment buildings and some individual homes. I would get a nickel commission on every paper. So it was $5 a week, but I had to collect the money. I was charged 25 cents for the papers for the week. I had to roll all the papers in order to be able to toss them. There's no plastic bags at all. So you'd roll them up and stuff it in, and you would toss them. And I'd have a basket and have this big canvas bag with 100 papers in. And if I tossed it and there was water in the vestibule or outside this little home, I didn't get paid. And I had to collect, and I learned about deadbeats. I'll never forget it as long as I live. There was one woman, it was like a bungalow with a tall stairway to go up to the apartment. And I would come to collect, and she'd see me in the window, she'd run to the back. I run to the back, she'd run to the front. Then after that, she had a dog. I couldn't go to the back. Well, I had to cut her off. because all the money she owed me, that was all my profit.
Yeah.
So I learned about deadbeats quick. But anyway, we've had some tragedies, and my son got married 1979 in Piedmont, California. He married a California gal. They were both living in New York, but the wedding was at her house in Piedmont, her mother's house. So my dad and mother came to the wedding. We flew people out. And I had a niece that lived in San Jose. So after the wedding, they decided they'd go visit my niece, San Jose, but my dad he had needles in his behind. There was nothing to do. And he was at the ballpark 3 times a week, at least. In those days, Wrigley was a real sportsman. He had a philosophy, old man named BK. There were 35,000 seats in the ballpark, 10,000 box seats, the lower and upper deck, and 25,000 grandstand seats with the bleachers. A ticket, advanced ticket, only could be bought for a box seat. The grandstand and bleachers went on sale 10 o'clock the morning of the game. And his philosophy was, that's our future, the youngsters and so forth. My dad would go there, get the best seat in the house on the grandstand. Thursday was Ladies' Day, free, no tax. So he was there. So that day, he was supposed to stay in a couple of weeks. And he called up and he said, no, I got nothing to do here out in the suburbs. I'm going nuts. I'm coming home. Well, that was a Sunday. I picked him up at the airport. And he says, who's in town? I said, the Dodgers are in town. And they were fighting for the pennant. I says, don't go to the game. You're going to have every kook in the world out there. He said, okay, I won't go. He was retired. And we had a place in Hilton Head that we were supposed to go on Tuesday or Monday, I forgot. We had time sharing at Hilton Head. And I'm watching the end of the game that Monday. And I get a call from my mother. He went to the game. He never drove a car in his life. He used to take the bus. And he was waiting in line after the game, and some kid, 15 years old, tried to pickpocket him. There were 60 of them in line. And he caught him. He said, what are you doing? The kid grabbed him and threw him out in the center of Addison Street, and the bus ran him over. That was it. Suffered for 30 days. So there were some articles by Ann Keegan in the Tribune, wrote a number of articles about lost a good fan. He was 81. He was a serious diabetic with insulin when he was 37 years old. But that's the way life is.
Yeah. So, okay, let's go back again. Now you were in college at the University of Illinois,
Yeah.
Champaign-Urbana.
Right.
Okay. And were you there? Well, let me. And you were an engineering major.
I was an engineering major.
Okay. And how many years did you go there?
Well, we had enough. I had enough credits, and my roommate, he was a sociology major. I was an engineering major. We had enough credits to graduate in 3.5 years, because we had heavy schedules. And I was a good student in the engineering school, and we were active. We were concerned about what was happening in Europe.
Because this is from like 38 to 41
Yeah, right,
in that range
right.
you're talking about. And then,
So we were listening to the Bear game on Sunday, December the 7th. Prior to that, about a month and a half before that, I got a direct commission to the Bureau of Aeronautics in the Navy. A guy that couldn't swim. So I said, when I'm going, I had volunteered. Don't worry, we'll call you. Well, I didn't get a call by 6 weeks.
Were they going to take you into the Navy, or you?
Yeah,
gonna
right
work
into
for
the Navy.
Oh, right into.
I was supposed to go eventually to somewhere in New York
Uh-huh.
for, I don't know, training or whatever it was.
Right.
And we're listening to the Bear game on that Sunday, December the 7th. And this young, aggressive, what was I? I was 20 years old. Senior in college, 20 years old, graduating. I was a punk behind my ears. And the two of us are so mad. We heard that the Army Air Corps was on campus Monday, recruiting. So Hi and I says, we're going down volunteer, we want to be pilots. We want to get over there. And we did. We volunteered, and the recruiting officer said, you're all set, we'll send you orders. I said, well, I have a little problem. What's that? I said, I'm a lieutenant junior grade, direct commission in the Navy, Bureau of Aeronautics. What do I do? Don't worry, we'll get you out. So he writes up an order, sends me up to the Board of Trade building, that's where the headquarters was in Chicago, Navy. And I come up there like a sheepish guy, and I said, sir, here's my orders, you know, to discharge me from the Navy. He said, you're never going to get out of the Navy, forget it. I said, well, what do I want to do? So he comes back a half an hour later, he's mad as hell, he said, here, get the hell out of here. So then, we're ready to go. We left school. I worked, helped my dad, and waiting for orders. And I was courting Ann, met her.
I meant to ask you about that. Had you had any girlfriends in high school or anybody special?
I was in love with my third grade teacher.
I'm gonna find out.
Third grade teacher. In college, I was dating some gal, not real seriously. I was dating some gal, nice gal. And then a friend of mine that I grew up with since kindergarten, we're still friends. She's a widow now. Introduced me to Ann.
And let's
Maybe I should sit in.
yeah, I'll let you go over by him. Let's just get you into this here now for a little bit. Okay. There you go. All right.
Now you're gonna tell the truth.
Now we're gonna have somebody
Well,
to
Linda's up.
corroborate what you're telling us now. Okay.
So we started a date, and I didn't have a car. I used to take her on the streetcar. And I lost my hair when I was a junior. I had a big head of hair, and I caught as a sophomore a case of impetigo. Oh, was I sick. So someone suggested I go home and get a crew cut. I had it all over. Well, that crew cut never came back, and slowly but surely. So I used to wear a fedora hat all the time to hide my baldness. But we dated, and we went various things and so forth.
A straw hat too.
Yeah, straw hat. And after that, I was waiting for orders. The orders didn't come.
Okay, I want to get Ann. And what was your maiden name?
Groll. Groll.
Okay, and how did your what was your dad's name and your mom's name?
My mother was Charlotte. My father was Harry or Herman. And
How did they end up in Chicago? Where did their ancestors all come from?
my father came here when he was by himself from Hungary or Czechoslovakia. I'm not sure which, because the borders had changed.
Right.
When he was by himself, when he was very young, when he was about 16. My mother came with her family. She had brothers and sisters, and a mother. Father, they came from Romania.
Oh.
And
what kind of work did your father do?
my father had a tavern.
And were you a waitress in the tavern?
No.
A barmaid?
No.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I have 2 sisters. I'm the oldest of 3 sisters.
And what are their names?
Marilyn and Leonore.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, what were you doing when you guys met? Were you going to school or working?
No,
or what?
I was working. I worked for a couple of places, business type of businesses. The one I met Ray, I was working for a plant that made microphones for the Army.
Oh.
I was basically, I had my training was a comptometer operator. Comptometers, I don't know if you know,
No, what
it's
is that?
like an adding machine,
Oh.
only it's not the same as an adding machine. And it was, the name of the company was Share Brothers, and I think they made microphones for the Air Force.
Okay, Ray. Well, let's carry on. Okay, you're into the Army now. So where was your first duty station and stuff?
My first, after I had an appendectomy waiting for orders, so I recovered that, and then orders came through to report in April of 42. And High and I got the same orders, the way we went. And we thought we were going to go to Randolph Field, Texas, which was a permanent base for basic training. Well, lo and behold, we went to Nashville, Tennessee, and we helped build that base. That was Classification Center. It's the only other classification center other than Randolph Field. And in the process of getting on a train, I met an old high school guy, Willie the Greek, we used to call him, Willie Gazeas. And he played, a great basketball player, he played heavies. He was 6 foot tall, just like I. Franco was. And we got to be very friendly, the three of us. And we went to Nashville, Tennessee for classification. Well, we went through all of it, psychological, aptitude tests, and so forth. And we were qualified for bombardier, navigator, pilot, physically and everything else. And the base was loaded with a lot of guys coming in afterward. We spent 10 weeks in Nashville, of which I did a lot of KP and mopping a lot of floors. And we're frustrated. Here you volunteer the day after Pearl Harbor. What the heck's the matter with the damn bureaucracy? Well, all of a sudden, the rumor bug starts. Orders are coming through. Man, now we're going to be a pilot. The orders came through. They wanted only navigators, 300 of them. Well, we were devastated, the three of us. We go over operations office. We didn't volunteer it. You did. You were in the Army. You do. You go. So you got ready, whatever your clothes were, and they backed in after the base finally, after 10 weeks was built. They had railroad tracks right into the base. They backed a Pullman train in as it got dark. Everybody got on a Pullman train. All the shades were drawn. And away we went. Now we're going to basic training. Well, as we as young guys and with a lot of curiosity, the train stops next morning. We pull the shade up, look out. Man, this Texas looks terrific. We thought we were going to Randolph Field, Texas. Porter comes down. He says, what are you guys looking at? Boy, this Texas is terrific. He says, you ain't in Texas. Where you at? You're in Monroe, Louisiana. Oh my God. That was the hole of holes. We were there a couple months for basic training. And it was an experience, Monroe, Louisiana. You talk about the pits of the world. After that, orders came through that they needed navigators for celestial navigation.
Let me just back up a minute. Were the sergeants pretty tough on you? Your drill instructors and stuff like that?
Oh, they were tough.
And what about being Jewish? Was that a problem for you at all?
Never had a problem. Never had a problem. So the orders came through. There were about a couple hundred of us that needed navigators for overwater celestial navigation. And we got lucky. That was about August of 42. And we were shipped to University of Miami at Coral Gables. Pan American instruction. We're the best. They're the only ones that flew. And the Army took over the San Sebastian Hotel in Coral Gables. And the University of Miami was a small entity at that time in Coral Gables. And we had some tough training. Reveille was up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And we did a march, 3 miles, 4 miles, 6 miles. We had a tough CO. He was an ex-butcher. Captain Merritt. Oh boy, he was rough. And after that, after eating, we'd go to class. We had some great instructors. And class was very intense from 8 o'clock to noon, 4 hours a day. Learned a lot. Well, it came easy to me because of the math background. So I would help roommates and other people try to make it. And then we'd have night training. And as I told you, in the old Catalina flying boats. And that was at Devorkin, which was a naval base just south of Miami. I thought I'd wash out because I'm not a good sailor. And you'd have an hour of preparation and so forth, and that boat was, oh my God. But once I got in the air, nothing bothered me. It's amazing, nothing. Well, we got some damn good training, very good training with they, instead of a sextant, they call it an octant. And we did a lot of land work and a lot of so and so. And we did that for a little over 6 months. We graduated in March of 1943. It was a nice ceremony at the hotel. And they made an announcement. Some of the guys were married then. Some were courting. They made an announcement that they're going to put in a big fishbowl 3 pieces of paper. One had number 1, number 2, number 3. And they would shuffle it up like a lottery. And they put up on a bulletin board what number 1 meant, what number 2 meant, number 3 meant. Now, some people, then you had, from the time of graduation was over, let's say about 11 o'clock or 11:30, you had until 4 o'clock that afternoon to trade numbers, depending on what your desires were. Some had a 2-week leave, B-17 group. Another had whatever it was, troop carrier. Another had 4th Fairing Command. Well, Willie the Greek and I were there. We go in, we pull out number 3, 4th Fairing Command. My buddy from college, he disappeared, never pulled a number out. Took off, I don't know where he went. Well, Willie and I, we scoured the town. You name it, every bar, you name it. About 3:15, he trips in. Where were you? Well, I was, had a couple of beers and so forth. You didn't pull a number. What number? He didn't know anything about it. Get over there and pull a number. Goes over and pulls out number 3. So we were shipped from there. We were shipped to St. Joe, Missouri for additional training in Rosecrans Field. And that was trained in a B-25, the greatest airplane we flew. We were there a month, intensive training, night training, night training, night training. Then we went to Memphis. And in Memphis, I was in a squadron, and that was the 4th Fairing Command. And May, I hadn't had a trip yet. And this was an incident that probably changed my life. Everybody, the ferry commander was such, we had all navigators, we had pilots also. Orders would come through, pick up a plane, and you'd have maybe a pilot on base and a navigator and an engineer and radio operator from the base that were stationed there. In some cases, you didn't have a pilot. A young kid would come out of pilot school. The hats were down here, hot shot. And you'd have to take the plane and him over. So you'd have a radio operator and engineer. Well, it so happened everybody was out. I get a call from operations, Devorkin, get down here. So, come down, yes sir, he says, I want you to meet Captain Wynn. I'm 21 years old, and we had during World War II, direct commissions, their wings had an S in the middle, service pilots. Some came from crop dusters, some came from the airlines. This Captain Wynn came from the airlines. I would say he's about 40. And he looks down at me, he says, son, are you a good navigator? Yes, sir. Well, his crew had just come in, and his navigator went on a 2-week leave. And a trip came up. I didn't know anything about it until he gave me the orientation. He says, we got a special order. I'm giving you a half an hour to go back to the barracks and pack your B-4 bag. We're going to leave for Tulsa, Oklahoma, Army aircraft, to pick up a special B-17. Really? What's that? He said, you know the trips that we're flying, in the wintertime we're flying the southern route. That's Puerto Rico, Belém, Brazil, Georgetown, Natal, which is dumping off spot. In the summertime, they're flying the North Atlantic. Bangor, Presque Isle, Gander, and so forth. He says the Army has to get airplanes into North Africa, the operation. And they got to get them quickly. There are 2 planes that are designated. Me, that's Wynn, and Captain Katz. Captain Katz is he's out. He's 3 days behind me. We're going to be number 1. We're going out first. So we go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, our engineer, radio operator checks everything out, co-pilot. He had his regular co-pilot. I'm the only 5th wheel. Checks out the B-17, what they had done. They outfitted with extra wing tanks. And that airplane was loaded. So, okay, let's go. Where are we going, sir? We're going to Bangor, Maine today. Off we went. Well, it's a piece of cake navigating in the States, you know. You got radio, you got ground, dead reckoning, no problem. We get to Bangor, Maine. He said, okay, get some shut-eye. We're going to Gander tomorrow morning. So that's what happened. We get to Gander. He says, come on, Ray, let's go. We got to make a flight plan. We go up to operations, see the meteorologist. He says, we want to take off 4 o'clock this afternoon, 4:30, just before the sun sets. Meteorologist says, you can't go. What do you mean you can't? I can't go. He says, the weather out there is terrible. Got all kinds of fronts out there. So, Captain Wynn says, how do you know? There are no reporting stations out there. You're just speculating. Well, a pretty good guess, you know, the isobars and all this stuff. You can't go. He says, all right, I'll give you your due. Go back. He says, okay, we're going tomorrow. Next morning, he said, come on, Ray, let's go. Go up to operations. I had my flight plan already set. The flight plan was to go from Gander, Newfoundland to Oran, North Africa, and Algiers. It's a long way over the water. So we get there, and the meteorologist says the same thing. He says, you're full of baloney. He says, we're going, I'm signing myself out. He said, okay, that's okay by me, as long as you put your name on it. I said, okay, Ray, go get some shut-eye. We're taking off at 4:30. We get in, plane's all checked out. And where am I? I'm down in the Bombardier. I'm next to the runway. That guy, he took that plane down that runway. That runway's about 9,000 feet. And I said, boy, get this thing off the ground. I never thought that thing would get off, and slowly off it went. Well, with the sun setting, you got very little. You're on dead reckoning, except you can shoot some sun lines. Will give you the longitudinal position, east and west. So you gotta wait. Gets dark. Gets dark, and man, I'm looking at that sky. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Come on, stars. Well, the navigator's friend is the North Star. If that North Star is shining, you're in good leg. At least it'll tell you how far north or south you are. And I'm shooting those things, and it was so cold where I was at. They were up on top. They had heat. My lips started to swell. They were like Ubangi Savage lips. Comes down, you want some juice? Yeah, give me some juice. They're relaxing. It's on autopilot. Well, we're out 8 hours. And he comes down and he says, son, how we doing? I says, great. He said, where are we? And I got fixes, good fixes all along. I said, we're right here. He says, we are? He says, what are those lights out to the right? He says, are you sure we're not over the Canary Islands? Well, if I had a heart, it went down to my heels. No, sir. Can't be, sir. And the lights are all over the place. Well, he says, oh, you're doing a good job, son. Goes back up. I took a fix every 15 minutes. Worked like a dog. I'm getting fixes like I'm supposed to, you know. Nice, tight triangles, beautiful. North Star, beautiful. I says, I don't know what it is. Well, now, it's like the desert, I imagine. I don't know. But with cloud cover and water, you start looking for land. Wind comes down, Captain Wind, he says, give me an ETA of the coast. Give it to you, sir, a few minutes. Calculate it out, give an ETA for the coast. Now, we would fly either at 9,000, 11,000, or even odd or even, depending on which direction. Never higher than 11,000 because we had no oxygen. Well, now everybody's looking. I'm shooting sun shots, getting up high enough and getting some different shots. We learned at Pan Am how to use white caps as a fixed point. Caps that are white breaking instead of ground fixation, so you learn a little bit about drift. Everybody's looking out the window and it looks like a mirage. You think you see land. Just like in the day, you think you see land. And you get more anxious, and we're all looking there, and I'm in that damn, down there, that bay, Bombardier's Bay. And now we're worried because the Atlas Mountains are 16,000 feet high, and they're only about 7 or 8 or 10 miles inside the east of the coast. And they're south of Casablanca, most of the range. Because when we would have to go to England through the southern route, we'd have to go from Ghana or Dakar through a pass of the Atlas Mountains to get to Marrakech, which was the jumping off point, which was like at about 9,000. A few of them didn't make it, needless to say. So now I'm worried, my God, if we don't... So here they said, there's land! There's land! And we hit that land right on the ETA to the minute. That, a big change in my confidence that lasted me the rest of my life. And not only that, the confidence that Captain Wynn had in the little neophyte. That's how mature he was. Well, that was a piece of cake after that. A heading, being we're in Iran. We were in the air 16 hours and 50 minutes. It's a long time. So we landed, and while we want to go to bed, operations officer come out, you're not going anywhere. You're going to have to be debriefed. So it was an hour and a half to be debriefed. We got through with that. We get into the bivouac, which was just, they reconnoitered some, I don't know, apartment building and so forth with a courtyard. In the courtyard are slit trenches. We didn't get into our bunk. Here comes the air raid siren. The Italians decided to bomb. Out we went in the slit trenches. Well, it was over real quick. That was it. And then we used to, after ferrying a thing like that, or any airplane, we would come back as a passenger on various stuff. Usually, they call the B-24 C-87,
Right.
and or we dreaded the C-46 coming back as a passenger because that was, we had more C-46s blow up in the air. Eastern Airlines and American had contracts with the Army. They wouldn't touch a C-46 that they were flying for supplies. They made almost 18 modifications between the firewall and the engine. Army didn't do that until later on. And who was flying those C-46s? The guys on the hump.
Right. Yeah.
So we'd come back on a number of C-46s and the bucket seats. And every time that engine gave a cough, no matter how you were asleep, you were up.
I think they said with those also they had big doors on both sides of the fuselage, so it was pretty, would be like that.
It was couldn't hold a candle to the C-47. So that was an experience. We had others delivering, if you want to hear about it.
Sure.
We would change pilots every so often on a trip. Always had.
Now, where did you fly out of most of the time?
We'd fly out of either Miami or West Palm Beach. Pick up the plane and whatever it was at. We go from Memphis to either Miami 36th Street Airport or West Palm Beach, mostly West Palm Beach. And I had one trip with an A-20 to be delivered to Abadan, Persian Gulf, which I think I told you yesterday. In Abadan, the P-47s were assembled, never flown over. They went by ship, or the parts went by ship into the Persian Gulf, and they had an assembly line in Abadan, put it all together, and the Russians were taking off after that. It was a Lend-Lease. And we'd bring other stuff, C-47. Some of the navigators would go up to Leningrad with the Russians and come back, or pilots and so forth. And this guy, we called him Sleepy Proctor. He was from Texarkana, Texas, and he was a crop duster. He was a crop duster down south, you know. Why did we call him Sleepy Proctor? Because at the officers' club we'd all play poker. What else was there to do? He'd have a cigarette in his mouth and he'd fall asleep. Call him Sleepy Proctor. Well, my luck, at an 820 with Sleepy Proctor. Now there's nobody else, just he and I. I'm back in the turret where the tail gunner is, and he's up in front. And the only communication is throat mic. And the bare wires are running through front to back. So we were okay. We go to Branklin Field, which is a permanent base like, Clark Field in the Pacific. From there we go down to Trinidad, or Georgetown, making all these 1,000-mile hops. Belém, Brazil, and finally into Natal, which is a huge base. Huge. And that was the jumping off point. Well, the Army engineers had to do something halfway. So there was an island, a volcanic island called Ascension Island, exactly halfway between South America. And that's where the British monitored the Atlantic telephone cable. There were 100 families down on the coast. Well, the Army engineers came in and they blasted a runway. And so you had a mountain here, you had a mountain here, you had an 8,000-foot runway, 450 feet above sea level, with a sheer drop down to the water. So that's where we would go. The island was only 3 by 5, and a lot of guys missed the damn island. They wouldn't make a positive adjustment to one side of the island. They try to hit it right on the nose. Well, we take off from Natal. I says, Sleepy, don't fall asleep on me. Oh, no, Ray, don't worry about it. So we get up to 9,000 feet. We're out flying. I give him a heading. He puts it on automatic pilot. We're out. I think it was like about a 5-hour trip. Maybe it cruised about close to 200. It was a pretty good plane, 820. All of a sudden, we're losing altitude. And oh my God, this guy is falling asleep. We're down to 8,000, down to 7,000. And I'm screaming in the throat of my nothing. I think I've called him everything imaginable. Well, all the controls were running right through. So I keep jumping on those controls. Maybe I'll wake him up. I'm jumping and jumping. We're down to 3,000 feet. He wakes up. What's going on? I says, if I was near you, I'd shoot you with my ferry pistol. So we landed at Ascension Island. He said, oh, Ray, don't worry. Everything will be fine. I says, I'm telling you now, no monkeying around. So the next day, that night, they had a lot of USO troops. And Paulette Goddard and another guy was there. We take off. All of a sudden, he's buzzing the field. I said, what are you, crazy? No, I want to say goodbye to Paulette Goddard. Well, this is the kind of kook I'm flying with. Well, anyway, we got to Aberdeen, came back, and went in operation officers. No more, that's it. I'm not going with them. So a few weeks later, sure enough, it was a big push before D-Day. There was at least every 3 minutes, there were at least 100 planes taken off. We used to kid that the British Isles are going to sink into the sea from the weight. This went on for over a year. So we got a C-47, and I got my regular crew. The co-pilot, good guy. He was a second lieutenant. Proctor was a first lieutenant. He didn't make captain. Radio operator and engineer. And everything is fine. We make all the stops, and we get to Marrakech. And the weather socks in for 21 days. The plane, there was no place to put a plane anymore. Everybody's coming in backed up. So what happened? Everybody's shooting craps and everybody's this and so forth. And you had to be very careful because Spain was on the Nazi side. And they would jam the radio with a radio beacon to come on over their area. Instead of having confidence of where you're supposed to go and navigate, they'd shoot them out of the sky. We lost a lot of guys. Portugal was on the Allied side, neutral but on the Allied side. Ireland was neutral but on the Allied side.
Axis side.
On the Allied side, Ireland. Right. So finally it was our turn to come, and a bunch of us take off together 3 minutes apart, you know. And what we had to do, we had to go way out west to a longitudinal division purpose so that the night marauders that came out of Brest and out of France were shooting them down. So we all had flame arresters. Radio silence, that's it. Okay? And you navigated. And when you got up near Ireland, you still had radio silence, but the Irish were terrific. We had maps that the Irish had etched into their coasts numbers that were like 6 foot tall. The corresponding numbers that were on our maps. So it was easy. You made a landfall, made a position, another position, into a place like called St. Morgan, which is north of London. And it would deliver to planes. Well, that was a piece of cake. But England's weather can change in 20 seconds. I bring him over, I'm packing all my stuff, I'm sitting back relaxed, I bring him right over the field talking to the tower. Tower says your number so and so and so and so, you're in the pattern. Radio operator, he's relaxing, you know. The co-pilot, he's relaxing. And all of a sudden I hear him on the beam. He's making an instrument approach. And I look out, the clouds are coming like crazy, socked in. And he starts heading northeast on the leg of the beam. I says, Sleepy, we're over the field. Where you going? I know what I'm doing. And it's getting fainter and fainter. I says, I don't know what you're doing, but there are mountains here 5,000 feet high. And you're flying at 2,500 feet. I says, you do whatever you want, but you better get up above 5,000. Fast. I know what I'm doing. I pulled out my ferry pistol. All the other guys are looking at me.
Yeah, very pistols where you would shoot flares up
Yeah,
if you needed to.
flares.
So.
I said, if you don't get up above 5,000 feet, I'm going to blow your brains out. Okay. Now he's heading up over 5,000. And he's heading out on a northeast quadrant. And the winds are behind us. It's getting fainter and fainter. We're out that almost an hour. Throws his hands up. Get me a heading. I'm lost. The radio operator was a great guy. He was going to kill him. He holds his key down, calls for a fix, gets his fix back, give him a heading, came back. We were lucky we were in a C-47 because they had enough gas. We were over 2 hours due. I come down, everybody said, what happened to you? You know, we thought you were lost. We're shot down. I says, talk to him. Came back in operation. I said, you can court-martial me. I'm not going with him on any more trips. That's it. After the war, I don't know how many years later, 7, 5, 6, I get a call at home. Who is this? It's Sleepy Proctor. Come on, let's have lunch. No way. So that was another experience. You know. But a lot of people had similar experiences, you know. I had one fella we shared a house with in Miami. When I would be out, he would be in. When he was out, I would be in. And he was from Daytona. He and his wife, we were married at that time, and he and his wife were from Daytona Beach, Florida. He had a hot shot with the hat down on C-47 on the northern route one day, and he's over Greenland. The wings are icing up. And he says, turn around, tomorrow's another day. You'll crash this plane. The wings are icing up, and there's no way of getting them off. Oh no, everything will be fine. Well, he had a confrontation also. He turned around, lived to another day.
Well, let's expound a little bit. So you guys got married. When did you get married then?
Got married Christmas Day, 1943.
1943.
I had a 5-day leave.
Yeah.
And I asked her to marry me. She's fine.
I didn't know what I was in for.
And I came came home and we had a wedding in my mother-in-law and Ann's mother's house. Everybody was gone, 17 people in the house. And it was nice, and my mother-in-law was a great cook, and she did. After the wedding, I played pinochle with my father-in-law, a couple of her uncles, and her sister, middle sister, kept saying, it's 12 o'clock. Go ahead, it's your honeymoon. It was snowing. Oh, God, cold.
We were Christmas Day, yeah.
It was Christmas Day, so my father-in-law had a, mother-in-law did the driving, he never drove. He had a 1940 maroon Pontiac, 8, beautiful car. Took the car and had reservations at the Drake Hotel in Chicago, nice hotel. Gave it in the garage and went up to the front desk. I said, I have a reservation in a room. He looks at, oh, he says, we gave that room away. It's too late. It was like 12:30. I said, well, you see this uniform? I'm going to serve as fighting for you. I'm giving you 15 minutes to get me a room. Okay, sir. Got the room. Next morning, we were walking down Michigan Avenue. It was so cold. We stayed a couple of days and went back to Memphis where it was warm. We got back to Memphis for New Year's Eve.
I meant to ask you, what was the first car that you ever drove?
Me?
Yeah.
I was 15 years old, and I had a buddy of mine. His family was wealthy, and they had a Century Buick with the 2 side mount tires. And he had to go downtown for something. And at that time, the library was downtown Chicago. Yeah. No. He asked me what car you had?
Mm-hmm. Automobile.
Yeah, well, I was automobile.
Right.
So I never drove a car in my life. So the library was on a narrow street called Garland. It was very narrow. And there were cars parked.
The street.
And the cars were parked on this side. He says, take over. I said, I can't drive. It's a piece of cake. Don't worry about it. So he jumps out of the car. And I'm making this turn. And I didn't judge the distance. And I rip up about 3 cars. I swipe up the car. He jumps back in the car. He says, get over on the passenger side real quick. Here comes a cop on a horse. He gave him some cock bull story. Oh, God. That was my experience with a car. No way.
Now, I always wonder, when you see movies and things, it's always, because you were going into harm's way, there was no doubt about that, well, should we get married now and, maybe get killed or wait till after the war, or did those things go through your mind at the time?
Well, you go in, you look at it this way. You got a job to do, and you were trained to do that job. And there are certain things you can control and certain things you can't control. We lost an awful lot of my buddies through equatorial fronts, where the tops of those fronts would go up over 100,000 feet. And judgment came into play. And if you were a navigator, some pilots had a lot of confidence in the navigator. Some pilots were very arrogant, immature. I always said to my wife, I was born old. So what would happen? You had to be very careful with the training. Where I got training at Pan Am, they experienced all of this. Now, if you had a front that the clouds went up 100,000 with huge turbulence, you try to go parallel to that front to see where the lightning will have a break. So if you're going to go through the front, you go through perpendicular with least exposure. What do these guys do? They're flying on the same track. So they're in that front all the time. So those things, we lost a lot of guys, wings would go off like that, like bamboo sticks. Then we had other instances where people were not conscientious, goof-offs. We had at Natal a huge maintenance base. They're supposed to do a 100-hour inspection. we found out guys would take off, barrel roll, and crash. They would take a stamp, a 100-hour stamp, and stamp it 100 hours. They weren't doing their job. So those are the things, the deficiencies you found, which is a microcosm of life itself. So there's a certain amount of fatalism. There's no question about it. And you did what you could. And hopefully you come back.
Well, you had a big responsibility. You and the pilot probably equally so, if not more, for you, because, I mean, the survival of the crew and yourself
Right.
depends on you. I mean, if you get lost and out in the middle of the ocean and or run into a mountain, or like you're talking about, I mean, so how did you handle that responsibility that
Well,
was put upon you?
the Captain Wynn incident gave me confidence. That was my first maiden thing. And I figured, what the hell? This is my job. I'm well qualified. And I'm going to follow all of the things that I was taught. And I'm going to try to do it in a conservative and articulate way. And if that's not good enough, then it's not in the cards. See? So after Memphis, the most experienced navigators, the Army Air Force decided that the Eastern and American was enough. They formed their own airlines. They formed 4 airlines. They formed one out of 36th Street Airport in Miami called Fireball Express. They went out of Wilmington, Delaware. And another one out of Bangor, Maine, that would fly in the Atlantic. What were we doing? And we were assigned to that. Fellow I flew with, my regular crew, great guy, John McCuskey, from McKeesport, Pennsylvania. Great pilot. When he landed, you didn't feel a thing. And he was married. Ann and I, we were shipped to Miami. We were there 13 months. At first, we were flying C-87s that were held together with baling wire. Terrible. And what we were doing, we were flying supplies over, bringing back VIP, whatever it was. It was a regular airline. Then we got lucky. They switched us, got rid of the C-87s, and upgraded to C-54s, which was the old DC-4, which was like going to a Ming Coat. Then we got lucky again. They shipped us up to Wilmington, Delaware, to Loran Navigation. It was a piece of cake. And it was during the Battle of the Bulge. So we switched gears. Portugal decided, they saw the way the war was going, so they decided to let us use the Azores, which they never did before. So instead of going the long way around, we were bringing back kids that were shot up in the Battle of the Bulge. We'd go from Miami to Bermuda, lay over, to the next crew came over, from Bermuda to the Azores. It was a piece of cake with Loran. I didn't have to even use a star.
Explain the Loran. How
Loran was a system where they had, it was not satellite like it is now, but Loran had boats, positioning boats that interacted, not like radio, but signals and so forth. And it was easy. You just turned it on and you were over here and you're over there. And then from the Azores, that was a long hop, about 11 hours from Bermuda. Then from there, it was a short hop, 1,000 miles or so to Casablanca. And then we returned. I would get a day off for every 3 days out. So we used to play golf. We got on every golf course for nothing. But that's what it was. And then we brought back kids that shot off. We had a plane, C-54, we lost an engine out of Bermuda on takeoff. And we had 60 guys in the back of bucket seats. And John feathered that engine, flew around dumping gas for about an hour and a half. And he landed as beautifully as he can be. When those kids that were in the Battle of the Bulge shot up, 19-year-old kids, 20-year-old kids, when they came down the stairway, they got on their hands and knees and kissed the ground. It's amazing. Amazing. After going through all of that, coming back, losing an engine, we went back and told them what it is, don't worry about it. They were that thankful.
Yeah. Anne,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask now, while you guys were married, what were you doing? Did you live on the base or off on where the?
No, we
No,
lived-
we had an
We
apartment.
lived off the
Yeah,
base,
off-
we had an apartment in Memphis, and we had an apartment in Miami.
And did you work
No.
or anything like that? When you would be away, how many days would you usually be away when you went over and back?
A couple of weeks, except when we were stuck 21 days in America.
Yeah.
But then I was out, we were married, and we had orders to, for 45 to 60 days in Karachi, India. And we were shuttling supplies from Karachi to Mizmara, which is at the foot of the Mount Everest, for the guys in the hump, flying the hump in Burma. So we were on detached service for that length of time. It was either 45 or 60 days. And India was a devastating experience. Poor, big gradient between the elite and the rest. The monsoon season was terrible. You couldn't see an airfield. It was all one big lake. And then we would have to refuel. It's about 3,000 miles, even though we were flying at that time C-87s. There were no towers in these small fields. So what we'd have to do, all the locals were all over the fields, even doing work or whatever it is. So in order to land, before you land, we had to buzz them off the field. You have to come down and buzz the field a couple times to get them off the field before we landed. In Mizmara, the chefs, the Army chefs were ingenious. I'm sure the Navy was too, but they were well supplied. But they would use storage eggs. But in India, he wants eggs? Oh, yes, absolutely. So they would use ostrich eggs. They were just big. Didn't know the difference. Didn't put a little salt and pepper on it. But like Ascension Island, used to call the guys there, were there 3.5 years. They were rock happy. We used to call them rock happy. But they were ingenious. We always tried to get in there on a Thursday to lay over on Friday before we left, or a Friday, because they made friends with the British that were monitoring the cable. So on Thursday they would go out, they would catch tuna. And on Friday was always tuna. You thought you were eating veal cutlet because they would bread it, they'd have tuna steaks, they'd have homemade bread, and Black and Cross and jams were always there. You'd have a ball. Then showers, there were no showers, it was all open. So what did they do? They took a 55-gallon drum, cleaned it up, put a silcock in it with a little head, put it up on stilts, and they would collect in the reconnoiter, and they would collect rainwater, fill up the thing, and take a shower. They were great. They were, on Sunday morning, if you were there, the two chefs, the two cooks, would put on a big white apron with a big tall white hat, the chef's hat. They'd roll out two portable stoves. Everybody would line up, and they would ask you, how would you like your eggs, sir? Make them any way you wanted. They were great. They were ingenious, creative. Spam, was a big joke. But they made spam. You wouldn't know. You thought you had a salami omelet. They would take all the grease out of it first. Pan fry it first. make omelets. They would do that right in the tents in North Africa. The British even got to learn how to drink cold beer.
Do you know offhand how many flights you made during the war overseas?
If I recall, I think I had navigation hours around 1,800, plus double that coming back. But I think about close to 1,800. I don't know how many flights. I can't remember, but I was telling Linda. She asked me what kind of planes they were in the questionnaire. We delivered B-25s, B-26s, which we hated, not too many of them, A-20s, A-26s, B-17s, B-24s, C-47s. And I think we have one C-46, I'm not sure. But it was a pretty good variety. Best plane of them all, the three best planes. C-47, the old DC-3. The B-25 was a great plane. And the B-17. My friend was with me all along, and then he got switched. When they made the airline, he got switched to Bakersfield, California. That's where they had another airline. And he was flying B-29s out there, delivering B-29s, which was the plane that bombed, Hiroshima.
Now, when the war in Europe was over, then what did you do? Were you still going back and forth, or not?
No, we were still going back and forth. And then in the end of August, we came into operations, our crew, off the Bermuda Azores Casablanca run. Went in operation, he says, that's it, you're through. Got too many points, we're not going out anymore. Wait for orders. So we waited.
This was August of 44.
45.
Or 45, okay.
Right.
So
Wait
you
for
did
orders.
after Europe was, you
So we waited the entire, I think, whole month of September.
Yeah.
And the orders finally came through to go to, I was ordered to go be discharged in Bellevue, Illinois, in Scottsfield. And we had a car, an old chunky car that I traded with my partner. I had a Plymouth, a 1938 Plymouth, would never start when it was damp. So he says, sell that car and we'll make a trade. I'll give you my Terraplane, and that's it. I don't need a car. Okay, John. Took the Terraplane. Never forget, I gave him the $500 I got for the Blue Demon, and we started off. And nothing but trouble after a few hundred miles. Oil. We got to Scottsfield, Belvedere. I had to put it in a shop. I don't know how much money I spent on that thing. But the last day, it was a Sunday. No, it was a Saturday of the month. And orders came through. And there were, I don't know, maybe 8 of us. We're checking out. So I loaded up the car with all the equipment that I had that were expendable. You name it. Watches, carbines, 45s. I didn't want any of that. Loaded up in the car, and I started checking it out at quartermaster at the base. I got all this paperwork and so forth. I got through, and he said, you owe me 17 cents. I said, oh, you 17 cents? Why? He says, you're missing a little flight hat. Come on. No, you got to go through all the red tape again, fill out more papers. Okay, so we get all through. We're all set to go. General wants to see you guys. There were about 8 of us. And this general, I don't know what he was. He wasn't a West Point guy, but he must have been maybe a 90-day wonder. We're all lined up. He walks in. At ease, gentlemen. calls in his assistant, some lieutenant or captain. He says, how many of you fellas haven't had flight time this month? Well, we weren't flying. Always raise their hands. He says to his assistant, he says, tomorrow's Sunday, it's the last day of the month. I want you to roll out for these gentlemen. C-54, and I want them going up for 4 hours. That's how you spend money. So a couple of guys I was with, you going up? Not me. I had it. So I don't know how many guys went up there for 50% extra flight pay, you know. So we took off. We went to Scottsfield. Well, my roommate, he got out from college, and he went back to the GI Bill of Rights. And my dad had a nervous breakdown. Man said, what are you going to do? I said, I'd like to go back to school, but I got to get him straightened out. And then I'll go back, you know. So I never got out. Changed the whole lifestyle and everything else.
So what? So then, what did you do?
I came back in. I put money in, and I didn't
into the business.
Yeah, he had a small junk shop. I didn't like the retail end of it, so I changed it, expanded the place, and changed it into industrial. And I'd go out and get accounts for processing waste paper, basically.
Oh.
And from that, it accrued to other areas, manufacturing, packaging materials, and so on. So that was 46 years. Turned out pretty good.
And so where did you live in Chicago then when you went back?
We lived with Ann's sister and my brother-in-law. We lived with my mother-in-law when we came out of service. And couldn't get an apartment. Then her sister became pregnant. He got out of service. He was stationed the whole time at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. So he had to have a place to live. So we were pushed out, and they went in. She was pregnant. So they knew a few people that owned the buildings, and we got a very nice apartment in an area called Austin, the west side of Chicago. It was a nice area. And we lived there in the apartment, and then after a few years, 1947, Michael was born. We were thinking about that hospital. It was in Roten. It just came to me, you know, it's no longer there. And then in 1950, Linda was born. And we were each looking for a house. And her sister gave birth to a boy on the same birthday as mine. He was a year older than my son. So we decided, well, let's see if we can find a two-flat building upstairs and downstairs. So we did, in another section of town, the northern section. Very nice section. We lived there from 1950 to 49. And everything was fine. Then my brother-in-law decided he wanted his kids to go to the schools in the suburbs. And I got sick for a year. So I was away from the business for a year. And we took a lease. We sold the place. And I took a 2-year lease. And before that, my brother-in-law and sister, we were looking for property up in one of the suburbs. And we bought 2 lots next to each other. It hardly cost us hardly anything. Beautiful lots. And I got sick, so Ann says, no way we're going to go up there. Forget it. So he decided to get an architect and build, and that fell through. So he bought a house because he had to get out. And Highland Park was one of the suburbs. And we got out after a lease, and we built a house in Skokie. A nice ranch house, and we raised our kids there. Kids went to the Evanston School District. And I was active politically. I ran a precinct for about 20 years. And it was a nonpartisan community, got rid of all the corruption, very well managed community. And after that, we lived there 42 years, and we sold.
42 years.
42 years we lived in Skokie. And 12 years ago, we moved to a condominium in another suburb where we live right now,
What suburb is that?
Lincolnshire. So,
Did you play golf much
oh,
when you were in
yeah,
business?
I played a lot of golf. My two brother-in-laws were golfers. The one that we owned the two-flat building with was an excellent golfer. He was a caddy, and he was a kid in high school. And he was pretty close to scratch at one time. And he's a year older than I am. He's 87 in August. And he was the head of he was the CEO of Polygram Records. And life went on, but played a lot of golf. We used to have municipal courses were great in Chicago. They're great out here too. But we used to have 8 o'clock tea time on Saturday morning. Every morning. Played a lot of golf. In fact, they used to kid me, the two brother-in-laws. One brother-in-law was much younger, married to her baby sister, who's 10 years younger. And they used to kid me. Oh, you don't take any vacations, you don't do this, we ought to go play golf. So I said, okay, so I'll take care of it. So I went ahead and arranged to go to Florida in early March for a week. And they were shocked. I said, this is where we're going. So the first place we went was Kings Bay and south of Dennehy in Florida. They had 40 rooms. I felt in Chicago built it.
This is just for the men, though. Tell them.
Yeah, just
Not for the women.
No.
So the three of us would invite one friend to go. And we played 36 holes every day. So we'd come back. Everybody here, but oh, let's make it 12. 12 of us. We're going to invite someone else next year. Then we switched from there. We switched to the PGA headquarters that was in Florida on Singer Island. That's near Palm Beach. And MacArthur owned, there were 4 golf courses. In fact, in 73, I think they held a PGA there on a men's course. Gorgeous, old traditional clubhouse. And he owned the Colonnades Hotel. They called this course the Poor Man's Augusta National. If you stayed at his hotel, we had 2 suites, gorgeous, overlooking the water. Just men. And we played 36 holes a day. We tee off at 8 with caddies. We'd come in about 12:15, have a light lunch, 2 o'clock we'd go out with cards. And we had our matchups. We'd come in, they had a 19th hole. Dave, it was out of this world. We'd have dinner there. It was beautiful. We played for $5 a round, for 36 if we stayed at the hotel. And then the younger brother-in-law, he had a heart attack, and after that, broke up.
But you didn't you get your place in Florida?
Pardon?
Didn't you have a place in Florida?
Yeah,
one time?
after in 91, I retired, sold my business. And in 96, my mother got ill. I was taking care of her. We used to go to Longboat Key for almost 6 years for vacation. It was beautiful. And then in 96, we sold our house. And we bought a place in Florida. 96, we sold our house in 96. Bought a place in Florida. We had a place in Hilton Head for a lot of years, time sharing.
Oh, wow.
My son still has one there. He doesn't use it, but go down there and play golf. It's great.
And you bought a place in Florida?
And we bought a place. We bought a
Where
condo.
was that?
Well, it was in Delray Beach on the East Coast.
Mhm.
Jason DeBoca, and we lived at Glen Eagles Country Club. It was very nice. We had 2 golf courses, a full clubhouse that served meals all the time, lunches, dinners, It's a nice lifestyle.
Now you're staying here in the desert for a while this year.
Yeah.
I think several years ago you came to. Didn't you come to the desert kind of and stayed for a while in the wintertime?
No, we
No,
visited my sister-in-law, Ann's youngest sister,
Oh.
who's been coming out here February and March.
We stayed
Maybe.
at a hotel.
We stayed here. We had a time sharing in Hilton Head, so we made a trade one year for a week in Christmas
Yeah.
at the Marriott Resort time sharing.
I was thinking Linda had told me about that or something.
That was nice. And we used to come and visit Linda, every summer we'd come, Like she lived here, or she lived in Costa Mesa, or Huntington Beach, and then in Irvine.
So you got Michael and Linda. So what's Michael been doing, and what's his?
Michael
what's,
is a trial attorney. He went to MIT undergraduate, and he was very oriented in the sciences. After his sophomore year, he came home and he says, "Dad, I don't want to be an engineer. It's too boring." What do you want to do? Well, I've had some classes with Goodwin. That's Doris Kearns Goodwin. And he was teaching at MIT, and he said, "I'm going to go into political science." Okay. So that's what he did. He graduated MIT. Was going through it was a bad time, the Vietnam War, a lot of protesting and so forth. And he became very active in the Democratic Party. And he went then to Yale Law School. And he finished Yale Law School. And he ran for delegate in 1972 during the McGovern campaign. He and his buddies from school. And he was involved. He was about 6 feet away from Bobby Kennedy when he was killed.
Yeah.
Rosie Greer was right there. After that, he clerked for Judge Gazelle, who was one of the Watergate judges. It was a big influence on his life. Got very friendly and so forth. And after that, he was appointed to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Manhattan. So he was in New York, and he was in that office for 7 years. And he was single, full of vinegar. And he made very good friends with Louis Freeh, who was a FBI agent. They used to go with him. They were both young and under surveillance and so forth, and became very good friends. And then he met his wife, who was a clinical psychologist.
And what's her name?
Her name was Joanne Townsend. She grew up in Piedmont, California. Her father was killed in an accident in Baltimore. He worked for Wheeling Steel, and he was involved in the Golden Gate Bridge development of that. And she was in the car, and the chauffeur lost control. He was killed, and she was injured. But they got married in Piedmont, California in 1979. And he left the U.S. Attorney's Office after 7 years and went in private practice with an attorney that was Peter Rodino from New Jersey in the Watergate, John Doerr. And they were partners for 20 years. And about 8 years ago, they split partnership. And he's with another firm right now. He's happy.
Any children? Do they have any children?
They have one daughter. We have a granddaughter. She's 25. She went to the University of Chicago, graduated 3 years ago. Was out in San Francisco, like a lot of young kids, looking for a job, very bright. And now she's back in New York. She's film editing.
Yeah. What's her name?
Sarah.
Sarah. Okay.
And on October 13th of 2006, Joanne discovered she had Lyme disease during the summer. They had a place up in upper state New York. They had bought 63 acres, wooded old house. They were into antiques, that thing. And she got Lyme disease, and she recovered from that, and they ran an MRI on her that summer, and they discovered an aneurysm in her brain. And they discussed all kinds of doctors, and he says, it's right near one of the eyes. You may lose sight of one of the eye, but she went in for operation October 13th, and as they wheeled her into the surgery, it burst. She had a massive, died right there. So it's been a tragedy for him. So he's involved work. He's a workaholic. As Linda will attest. Linda and him are very close.
Well, tell us about that little Linda. What kind of a kid was she growing up?
But she grew up.
She moved.
She grew up.
Wait till she comes back.
She
No,
grew
it's
up
okay.
with
She
two
can watch.
tough boys, her brother and her cousin. Were very close in age. And they used to smack her around, and she was tough. She was a tough gal, but it's good. She had she had real curly blonde hair.
She doesn't remember it. I asked her.
Yeah.
I said,
Oh.
don't you, and her hair's so straight.
And
No,
then
don't you remember when
she
you
had
had
an
curly hair?
incident. She had an incident. She always had a dimple here. She fell on a pencil. That caused a dimple.
Really?
And then one day I get called at the office, and says, "Oh my God, I think she has a broken shoulder." They were doing something on a tricycle or something. The boys were monkeying around with her, and she probably remembers it. She broke her shoulder.
Oh, my
Then
gosh.
one day, Ann made a bunch of parfaits. We were having company down in the basement.
This was
smoking.
quite a bit later in
Huh?
her life.
Yeah,
It was quite a bit later
Yeah,
in her
right.
life.
yeah. So she says, "Linda, go down and get the parfaits." She goes down to the basement and get the parfaits.
They were on a tray in an upright freezer. I had made them, and I sent her down there to get them. Dumb that was, anyhow. That wasn't so bad.
But she was a good kid. She was like mother and daughter, very rebellious. I was tired. I'd come home, and she'd shoo me out. "You're not waiting up for her. She's still out." Teenager.
But
Yeah.
She went to college.
And she went to
University of Missouri, wasn't it?
went to the University here in Columbia. And it's another story. I got a call from my wife. She says, "Linda called. She wants to drop out of school." I said, "What?" She was a sophomore. So
She didn't
hopped a plane, St. Louis, got a car, drove to Columbia. I walk in, she was sharing a house, I guess, with 3 others or 4 others. I said, "What's this going on?" She said, "Well, what's school?" Yeah, that's also. And I walk in, I see some guy's clothes. "What's this?" "Oh, there's some fella comes by once in a while, leaves some clothes." I said, "I've been around too long." I'll tell you what, we'll go to dinner, and she takes a roommate gal with her. Come back. I said, "Look, you want to drop out of school, at least finish 6 months. You got 6 more months to go. You'll have 2 years in, then you can drop out. But if you drop out, you're on your own. I'm not underwriting it." "Oh, yeah, she's tough about it." "Oh, no, that's all right. I'll get a job." "Good." So that summer she comes home and brings Denny to introduce him. First thing my wife says, "This is our house, Linda. You will sleep in your room, and this young man will sleep in Michael's room. Period. Case closed." "Where you going?" "Well, he's an iron worker, and he has a job in Florida, and we're going to go to Florida." I said, "What is this, a traveling circus? You know, gotta get your
Are
feet on the
you
ground."
telling your life or Linda's life?
Linda's, I'm telling you.
You know,
So she says, "Okay, fine." And they came back to Columbia. Linda got a job in the school somewhere, I don't know. And she was on her own. She was tough, good. We had a good relationship. And about after a year, she calls me and says, "Dad, just, not going anywhere without an education. Is it okay if I go back to school?" I said, "Absolutely." I said, "You're back on the payroll." So she did, and she graduated in '73 and went on to graduation, and she had a relationship with Denny, and they went out to Palm Springs, and she went to Claremont College. She was a linguist, and she did a master's or so. She got through. I said, what are you going to do? She said, well, I'll get a job as a teacher. So she looked for a job, but she couldn't get a job. I said, how come? She said, well, they're only hiring Chicanos. She said, well, they don't want me to be a teacher. The heck with it. I'm going to find a job, and that's started with you.
She did. She's one of the first dental assistants I
Yeah.
had, and I still laugh about this. She had a resume, you know, and it had all this. She's had a master's and
Right.
you know, all this stuff, and so I interviewing her, and then I hire her, and I make little notes or something, and so a few years later, she comes across the resume I had, and the only note I had was pretty. So
What was that in
She
there?
was pretty.
I said, I had pretty. He said, you mean you hired me only because I was pretty, not because of it? I said, that's right. I said, I just hired you because you were the prettiest one. Didn't have anything to do with all your education, fancy education and stuff.
It's good.
So we still laugh about that.
Well,
But but she has really, well, first of all, she was the best assistant, you know, I think that I ever
She's a
had.
good
She was so
person.
dedicated and so
That's right.
bright, and then to go on with her own business, I mean, she's amazing. She
Yeah,
really is.
but what happened though, after they moved to Costa Mesa, she had to get a job. So she gets a job with a fella that makes skateboards.
Mm.
He says, how is he? He says, Dad, he's not gonna last the year. Why? Doesn't watch his business. He doesn't work like you did. And she watched me work. So she's talking to South America and Ecuador and all that, and Spanish and so on. Sure enough, a year. So after that, she calls me up. She says, you know, looking for a job. I got 2 offers. What are they? Well, one is with a savings and loan, and they're going to give me a position as vice president as a closing agent. The other one was with Safeguard Business System. So what they do, well, in customer service. New York Stock Exchange Company. I said, how's the salary? He says, well, they're both about the same. I said, well, I'll tell you what you do. The savings and loan organization, you can throw that in the wastebasket because you won't have any life. That title they gave you doesn't mean anything. And they'll work you to death and you're not going anywhere. Take the other one. She started in customer service. And from there, she was terrific.
Oh, I know, because we
then
had
she- then-
Safeguard, and she would
Right.
come
Yeah,
to the
and
office
then,
and stuff.
not only that, then she goes through this LBO, leverage buyout. These characters out of, you know, the times we're at, you know, lie out, you know. And how do you buy them out? You get bonds, you know. And she went through all of that trauma of acquisition, ineptness, incompetence, don't know what they're doing, just ridiculous. And it's happening now, greed. So finally she said, 6 years ago, she says, Dad, she says, oh, before that, they got married in 81.
I remember I
Because
was
the
there.
last time I was there, we were visiting, we're sitting at the John Webb, the hotel near the airport, and we're having lunch and we're gonna go to the airport. So I says, you know, this is 10, 11 years, you know, you have a relationship. Why aren't you getting married? Give me one reason why you shouldn't be married. We don't need a piece of it. I said, don't tell me that, will you? I said, I'm never gonna say this again. There's no reason why you shouldn't be married. You both have an investment in each other. So we come out in 81, next year, Linda and Ann and myself, we go down to Laguna Beach and we're having lunch at the Las Brises restaurant. That was the first thing in my mind. And she says, oh, look at that gazebo and that coastline. Wouldn't it be a great place for a wedding? Never even dawned on me. Came back a couple of days before we really leave. Story, she got very frustrated with Safeguard, the way that it was being run, whatever. She'd take 2 steps forward, with 3 backwards. You're very frustrated. So she decided that she's going to resign. And she knew this gal was on the opposite fence at one time because Linda defended the company in a lawsuit. She knew her, and she had been a distributor for about 20 years. So to her, and she had some physical problems with her mother and her husband. She wanted to sell. So she went to the head of the investment group, and she says, well, I'm going to leave. She says, oh, you can't leave. I need you. I got to have you. She says, well, if you need me, then put it in my palm. So a few weeks goes by, nothing happens. She goes down to Dallas. He says, well, what's going on? He says, well, you know, it's typical corporate stuff. If I take care of this, then it's going to upset the payroll structure of everybody else. She says, that's okay. We'll work out a severance pay. And my son worked out a very good package. And they made a very good deal for both of them, the seller and the buyer. And I says, good luck. I says, but remember one thing. I was a private businessman. You're on the other side of the fence now. You're an entrepreneur. The first thing you do, you make sure to recognize the fact that your best assets are your employees. That's number one. And you treat your employees like you want to be treated, because it'll come back in dividends. You don't want an employee to come to work for you that has to have a paycheck. You want an employee that's excited about coming to work for you. So I'll remember that. And that's what she's done. She has grown in 6 years, and creative and entrepreneurship, terrific. Very proud of her.
And they have a real bright daughter, do they not?
Pardon?
They have their daughter is very bright.
Oh yeah, Carly is terrific.
Yeah.
Well, it's great. It's terrific.
Now Carly, she's in college now?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
she's going to be a senior after this year.
Senior. Oh, where
Very
does she-
much interested in
She's
biotech.
at
Biotech.
the University of California. What?
Santa Barbara.
Santa Barbara, yeah.
Yeah, she's a very good student. Lyndon Denny done a good job. I says, look at, she always had a philosophy, argue about the big things, not the little things.